he's like the stereotypical like cop with a dead wife. Fucking
Yeah.
who we don't like, we never even get into it.
No.
This is basically like you see her once and then later he's like, I had a wife once, she's dead. Anyway. Like,
let me go kiss this other
sucks,
lady.
man.
Yeah.
Heather Graham's like, what's wrong with you? And he's like, well, having a dead wife really sucks.
Real bummer. Yeah. Ladies be dropping dead around this town. So what's a man got to do?
Like, oh, everywhere I go, ladies are just dying on me.
Yeah.
What's up?
Hi.
Hey. Hey.
Back at it once again.
Hell yeah. Welcome to The Low Ceiling. I'm John.
And I'm Pri.
Today we're talking about a very special film from 2001 called From Hell.
From Hell.
But before we get to that, there's some important cricket action today. India versus Bangladesh, second test day, day 3. The post-day thread on Reddit is really popping off. Bangladesh scored 227 overs and 10 goals.
And don't forget the wickets. Cause
they didn't score any wickets.
Oh, come on
this.
now.
Yeah, sorry. It's not. What do you mean wickets? Anyway,
All right,
cricket
get it
corner.
together.
We're done. Okay, so today I want to start off with a quote I read from someone named Alan Moore. Do you know who Alan Moore is?
My boy.
He's the man who hates everything that has ever been made from his own work, which is understandable because he's a bit of a genius. I found a quote on some random comic book fans WordPress site, and I'm sure it's legitimate, but it's the only quote I could find. Remember, this movie is about 21 years old. So Alan Moore says this. He's talking about the genesis of From Hell. It started with wanting to do a lengthy comic book about a murder, says Moore. Something with enough scope to treat it properly instead of regarding it as a standard murder mystery, where once you've got your forensic solution and ticked off the boxes on your Cluedo scorecard, the case is solved. I wanted a holistic view to examine the murder as happening within a whole system and the kind of effects it can have on society. I wanted to read that quote because it's really interesting, and it also the movie almost seems to completely disregard Alan Moore's desire for creating the book itself.
Yeah. The movie was like, if imagine what it's like to break into a cold sweat and have clammy hands all the time, but now it's 2 hours of that feeling. and that's what From Hell is. So yeah, the
movie, it's something. It's a real relic of its age. And I actually thought, so when we started our last episode, we did Jarhead, right? And we both like Jarhead. I happen to really like Jarhead. And we can talk about 60 minutes more about Jarhead if you want to. We can totally get to it. But the reason we chose Jarhead was because we're like, hey, we don't want to make a show that's about bad movies. We also don't want to make a show that's about movies that everyone fucking loves, that tons of ink has been spilled on them. We want to kind of find like underrated, strange, weird, nostalgic picks. From Hell was on television all the time when I was a kid.
Same, yeah.
When I was a teenager, which is shocking for a pretty violent movie. And I wanted to choose it because I was like, well, there are things in there that are interesting. Less things than Jarhead, but definitely there's some parts in it. The first 15 minutes of From Hell, I was like, oh man, am I going to really like this more than I remembered? And I didn't.
Really?
Yeah.
Within 15 minutes, you knew this is not going to be the one,
after about 15 minutes, it starts stronger than a lot of the rest of the movie. It really starts to fall apart as it gets closer to the resolution, which is there's a lot of reasons that I've taken notes on why that doesn't work. And I don't want to just pick apart a movie that's there. But the reason I find this movie really interesting is because I love the graphic novel. And I think it's one of the most interesting works of literature I've read in the past couple of years.
It's comprehensive as hell. What's that, 500 pages or something?
It's massive.
Yeah.
It's huge. And this movie just doesn't have enough screen time to properly like get into everything. But that's enough about me. What about you? How you doing? How you doing on From Hell?
I haven't read the comic book, the graphic novel, but I know that there's a difference in perspective, right? Because in the comic book, it is from Jack the Ripper's perspective as he walks through the city. Sort of. Okay. But the movie, of course, is from Inspector Johnny Depp's waking up in an opium den, just lit, and then being like, oh, I've had a vision, and them following through to solving crimes like a clairvoyant.
Yeah, so let's get into the plot, and then we can talk about what's gone wrong with the film.
Mm-hmm.
And the first mistake, the biggest mistake, which you just hinted on, was that so the movie opens with this kind of like drugged up opium-esque scene of a person smoking opium, and you're like, well, who is this? But because the movie stars Johnny Depp, it has to start with the guy who ostensibly becomes the protagonist. But the graphic novel does not really have a protagonist.
No.
It has many protagonists. It has many main characters, right?
I believe the inspector is separate from the guy who smokes an opium and has these visions in the comic book. They're separate entities, but in the movie, they were just like, you know what? We'll give all the powers to Johnny Depp.
Yeah. So so it opens with Johnny Depp smoking opium. And yes, one of the big problems is that in the book, Frederick Aberline, I believe his name is not the main character, nor does he look anything like Johnny Depp. They should have cast like Ricky Gervais as Frederick Aberline, the way he looks.
What's all this?
Yeah, like he looks like that.
Impression.
In fact, even Robbie Coltrane, who is his partner, would have been a better casting choice.
I mean, funny you say that, because they did first. The Hughes brothers first approached, I believe, Daniel Day-Lewis, who ridiculous.
I read they approached Brad Pitt too,
and Brad Pitt, and what's his face, Jude Law.
Yeah, Jude Law.
So
again, I'm not too wild about the production details of this film, but let's just say, so it came out in 2001. Mm-hmm. It was released 1 month after September 11th, so that really helped it. It starred Johnny Depp post Blow and post Sleepy Hollow and pre pirate
Caribbean
movie, Pirates of the Caribbean.
Rum. Yeah,
and it was shot in Prague, which we talked about, or Praha, as the Prahagians call it. Yeah, and so that's like most of the details. It was directed by the Hughes brothers, who are, I mean, the strangest pick. Yeah. Not for their talent, because I do think they are they're good directors. Like, they're not bad directors. They just have never made a movie that I've liked. But previous to that, they made like movies about black people in America, largely in South Central Los Angeles and stuff like that. Menace to Society was how they like broke out, basically. They did like kind of gritty crime films, you know. And then this was just like a very interesting pick. So it starts off with Johnny Depp's opium scene, and then it just bounces directly into how the novel kind of starts, which is the sex workers.
That's right. The true heroes of the film,
as they call them in the film, bangtails. Which, again, another casting just mind blower is Heather Graham. Just a weird choice to cast two Americans as the leads of this movie, when everyone else is British. And so basically what's happening with Heather Graham and her gaggle of sex workers is that they're being exploited by a gang. This follows the book pretty much. One of their friends has mothered a child with a royal prince in secret and is married to the prince. And essentially the book hints at this conspiracy, but the real driving force of the film is this conspiracy to cover up that the prince has had a child with a former sex worker. And so she's given a lobotomy, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And is really cool. So again, I'm not sure if this is really captured, but in the book, the sex workers all know about this, and they contemplate blackmailing the prince and the royal family for money to pay off the gang that is after them, essentially, right? And that doesn't really come through in the, like, does that, do you remember, does that come through in the...
Not in a way that it's like blackmail.
They just know about it, and that's a problem. And
yeah.
Queen Victoria enlists Sir William Gull, played by Bilbo Baggins, to silence them. Jack the Ripper. Yeah. Spoiler alert. You don't, like... Another issue with the film is that they try to hide the killer from you the entire time.
Correct.
Whereas in the novel, you know who the killer is, you know who he is in real society, and you know his motivations, and you spend probably more time with him than any other character, which is what makes the novel so interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I know the movie is riddled with sex crimes and debauchery, and just pretty on brand for Queen Victoria and her whole gang. Victorian era, the whole family. But that said, the way the movie visualizes that weird atmospheric red and green sort of noir-like vibe.
Yeah.
I think it was perfect for 2001 for, 11-year-old me watching it. And that was the only time I had seen it. And yesterday was the second time I watched this movie. So in my whole life, watched it twice. Both times, still a good experience.
It's not a bad movie. It's not I watched it twice, and I watched it twice in a week. And I wasn't like, ugh, gross. But there are parts of it that aren't good. Johnny Depp is a big problem in this film. He seems incredibly bored. And just like he doesn't want to act at all. His accent, I'm not the type of person who like rails on Americans' bad British accents, but his accent's not great. Do you want to hear my impression of him?
Oh my God, yes.
I'll take all you cunts down. So it's pretty good.
But right. Where? In the Caribbean?
No, in London.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to hear my Heather Graham impression?
Yeah.
Oi, I'm a sex worker in London, eh? I need money.
I need money for my music videos.
They're subtly different, but so like he is a problem, and the other thing too is that ultimately he's like the least cool opium user in all of cinema, because Clive Owen came in with the Nick and just absolutely
just ate his lunch.
Yeah, ate his lunch essentially, and he was following in the steps of sex criminal Robert De Niro's character in Once Upon a Time in America, who may be the least cool opium user in cinema history. Yeah, but he does use and there is opium scenes in that. This one though, like he's an addict, which has no bearing on the plot ultimately.
Yeah,
he's like he uses absinthe and he smokes opium, and it doesn't really matter. And then the other big problem, he's clairvoyant, which also has no bearing on the plot at all.
Yes, that is true. It does take away from his detective prowess.
But it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually help him in any way. He just sees it.
That's right.
And it's like he almost the problem with him being the main character, and also to be honest, the problem with the depiction of Heather Graham as Mary Jane Kelly is like they're almost tertiary to the actual action of the plot, which is driven forward by everyone else, kind of, except for them.
Correct.
Which is really weird. It's so weird.
Yeah, they ham-fisted a romance in there because what else are you going to do?
That's often where the movie starts to fall apart.
Correct.
Yeah.
There is a moment when he's obviously having hallucinations by using laudanum or absinthe or the pipe, where he sees
or by sleeping, using the drug of sleep.
Just hard naps. I did it 20 minutes ago. Like a revolutionary. He sees visions of the killer as well. And only later in the film does he see their face in the vision.
Well, he sees Dark Annie's face. He says when she's killed, and she's like the second one killed, I think.
Polly.
No, Dark Annie.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
The first Grapes one.
Correct.
And I gotta say, I'm a big Grape fan.
Yeah.
And so I really identify with these sex workers that if someone offered me grapes, they could Jack the Ripper me.
That's actually how we first met.
Yeah.
I had grapes, and you were like, I'm coming
You just
kind of
held them up by your face, and you were like, check these out.
Check these out.
And I was like, oi, mate.
Oi.
I really like those. Yeah. So like I really get it. And you know what, when I think about it too, Heather Graham is not bad. Her character is underwritten and not very good. The sex worker relationships, like their gang is kind of the most interesting part of the film.
Yeah.
Seeing them kind of chat with each other and like have actual sort of chemistry. Robbie Coltrane and Johnny Depp have chemistry, but it's 95% Robbie Coltrane's
of course
charm.
Just Hagrid being a big old sweetie.
Just Hagrid being Hagrid, yeah. Hagrid doing Hagrid stuff. Yeah, and so to get back to the plot, essentially, it's the middle of the movie is like these parallel plots of like Johnny Depp trying to solve the mystery which is hidden from the viewer and just should never have been hidden from the viewer ever. And it starts to become I know I've seen this movie a couple times, but it's like very obvious who there's like two real suspects. And even the one of them, Farrell, I think his name was, the original guy who lobotomized Anne, you're kind of like meant to think maybe it's him because he's a surgeon. And then the brilliant hiding of Ian Holmes' character as Jack the Ripper is that he points at everything with his left hand, even after he says Jack the Ripper's right-handed. I want to talk about Ian Holmes, but so these parallel strands of like Johnny Depp shows up, a couple hours too late to every murder, to every grisly Jack the Ripper killing.
It's because he's getting high, bro.
Yeah, because he's Robbie Coltrane has to wake him up every 20 minutes from an opium stupor.
You had to do that to me.
All that's cut out
a little while ago.
Yeah. And so Johnny Depp showing up late and not even making progress. It's weird. Like he makes progress through talking to William Gull, Jack the Ripper, who finds like the clue about the prince having syphilis and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then essentially the denouement is basically like Heather Graham's character is the next that Jack the Ripper is going to kill, but she leaves some poor girl from Belgium at her bed who gets killed in one of the more like historically accurate and very gross real things that happened in the Jack the Ripper case. I discourage everyone from looking that Wikipedia page up because there's an actual photograph of that killing and it's very disgusting.
Well, didn't the Hughes brothers also use real life photography from Jack the Ripper murders in the scenes?
Yes.
As a shock and value for the actors so they could get an edgier reaction than what he hoped for.
Yeah.
And I think they delivered on a lot of that.
Yeah. So I want to touch on the Hughes brothers too in a second, and just like the making of the film in general. But okay, and so Heather Graham escapes. She goes and gets Anne's daughter, the illegitimate child, the legitimate child, who's essentially the heir to the throne of England, which like ups the stakes a lot, but like doesn't really ultimately matter. And then she fucks off to her little town and leaves, and then Johnny Depp commits suicide.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, mad respect for ending a film that way.
They did film 3 separate endings.
Really?
Yes. They filmed one where obviously Johnny Depp dies, one where he continues to be an opium addict, and the third one is he goes off and joins Heather Graham and the baby. And big props that they stuck with the better choice. That is, he just straight up dies.
They could have done without Hagrid saying "Good night, sweet prince," though, which he does actually say.
Hagrid is super into Shakespeare in the whole movie. He's constantly
He's literary. He's a literary-minded detective,
which is very on brand for Hagrid. So
yeah, and so Johnny Depp dies at the end to take the secret to his grave, essentially, and Heather Graham lives happily ever after on the coast of Ireland. Yeah.
We've already talked about spoilers, right? I did want to tell you what really was shocking to me in terms of a spoiler was, now I hadn't seen the movie in 20-something years. I forgot that Bilbo Baggins gets lobotomized.
Yeah.
And that was very good choice.
Yeah, so the story with Jack the Ripper, which actually they follow the basic strokes of the novel's plot quite well. He's told by Queen Victoria, which is never, I don't remember, it's not truly depicted in the film, but it is in the graphic novel. He's basically told, he's the doctor to Queen Victoria. He's basically told, like, these 5 women know this thing. You have to go and kill them, silence them, make it look like Jack the Ripper. And he's like, got it. Yeah, I've heard of him. And so and then he's also a member of the Masonic Order.
Correct.
And which is cool. They don't explore that enough because Mason stuff is cool. But basically, in the novel, he gets way too into the killing, like he's enjoying it too much, and then is basically like, I am the cause of all great things of the 20th century, which the opening quote of the film quotes. It's weird. It quotes a quote that's used later in the movie, which is frustrating because they don't really achieve. They don't really get at what that quote means.
No.
Where it does in the book. And it's because it's just more complicated. I can't keep harping on about how much better the graphic novel is. It's unfair. But so basically, he does the killings, and then the Masons are like, all right, we'll stop him. We'll make sure he stops. And the cops are in on it because the police commissioner, the fucking James Gordon of this universe is a Mason, and he's like, don't worry, we'll stop him.
Yeah. And
then they stop him, and then in the book, it's not said in the movie, but in the book, they imprison him under a different name. And they lobotomize him. He's gone insane anyway.
Yeah.
They imprison him under a different name, and then in the movie, he's just lobotomized. He's sent to the insane asylum, and that's where he stays. In the novel, he dies, and his spirit kind of travels throughout time. To see, it's very interesting. So his spirit travels through time to see his influence later in England, and then eventually he ends up in Ireland, and he sees a woman who has 4 children, all named after the women that he killed, and she sees the spirit and tells him to go back to hell. Pretty cool ending. Like, nice. It's a really, really good ending.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the only movie that I know that does a title drop twice and a quote drop, because the movie opens with that Jack the Ripper quote where he says, one day men will say I gave birth to the 20th century. And then someone says it out loud later in the film, like you said.
Ian Holm says it out loud.
There you go.
Let's talk about Ian Holm for a second. This has got to be post Bilbo, just post Bilbo. He is really good in this movie. I think he's a little disserviced by the kind of like cheesiness he has to portray. Like when you don't know it's him playing Jack the Ripper, he is basically looks like a Nazgul, and he acts like a Nazgul when he's like talking to
when his eyes are all. Oh, you mean when he's a silhouette of a man?
Yeah. And then later, when you find out it's him, his eyes turn all black.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really lame.
It was so cringe. And I'm glad they did it, because 2001 would have eaten it up. This whole movie is like a music video. Yeah. But it's 2 hours long.
The Hughes brothers have a real sense of style, definitely. As far as I've seen only 3 of their movies. I'm not the best judge of like the quality of the Hughes brothers, but this movie, it's all style and very little substance. And I think because
they tried to adapt to the graphic novel as closely as possible in terms of visuals alone and not the plot. So they took the gory bits, they took the blood on the walls, the red sky, the camera panning down from the Parliament building to the underground world where the Freemasons White Shut is going on underground.
Masons Wide Shut.
Yeah, there's sex rituals where men just, stab each other with pointy needles.
I think that, so speaking of like style, it's not even a scene, but one of the things I do really like is I believe the first killing, a woman is yanked into a dark alley and you see this flashing knife stab into her. I think that is, I mean, for 2001, that was pretty cool for like a movie from that time. I think it's a really interesting and creative way of going about it. It's weird that nothing else quite lives up to that stylistic depiction. There are points, I think, like watching the movie, I was like, this reminds me a lot of Sleepy Hollow in ways, not just because Depp is in it, but because if it reminded me of Depp in Sleepy Hollow, it would be like he wasn't on opium. It would be like he was trying to act and stuff. But like it reminds me of 3 movies. It reminds me of like Sleepy Hollow, Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and The Prestige a little bit. It's like kind of the same time, but those movies all have like, the world seems more alive in them. In this version of From Hell, it's like all of these streets, they seem like really big and empty sometimes, and like there's not a lot of character to the world itself, to London. But then there's like these shots of like the carriage going over a bridge and the sky is all red and stuff, and that stuff's like really cool. That reminds me of Dracula a lot. But and then like a lot of the thing is too is like a lot of the scenes between characters are just flat. They're just like, there's nothing stylistic about them at all, basically, I think.
Aside from the spoilers, little coffin flop that happens towards the end. Shout out my boy Tim Robinson.
There's an episode of Coffin Flop in From Hell, which is thinking back, after I watched it the second time, I also thought of Coffin Flop. But I also thought, why did they have that in the film?
Yes, especially since they showed us what the body looks like 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So it was gratuitous, and well, also maybe they just wanted a reaction out of her friends.
Maybe
watching her face as a way to deter them from going back into the streets, which they do.
Yeah, they always do. They always end up going back. They do set the stakes, but again, they only kind of skim the surface of the issue is that these women owe money to a gang. They need money and they're not making enough money.
Right.
And well, maybe Heather Graham could, pull her weight, because it's this weird depiction of like, she's a sex worker who never has sex or talks to men at all. And it's a weird thing where you're like, you can't besmirch the purity of this main character, but it's like, she's a hooker in London.
Yeah.
She's probably going to get some gross guy's penis between her legs, like against a fence,
Which they make a point of showing over and over again with the other women, the other prostitutes who have to suffer in these ways. But Heather Graham's just like, no, piss off. There's no sex for you.
There's an incredible line said by a unnamed prostitute later in the movie where she approaches a man and says, "I can suck the Thames dry."
I thought she was one of her friends.
I was like, I can't believe that wasn't reserved for one of the named characters. That's a brilliant line. That might be the greatest line in the film.
I thought it was maybe Dark Annie who said that.
Dark Annie's dead at that point. Dark Annie is great performance.
Yes.
Up until her death. Actually, 3 of the sex workers in particular, Dark Annie gives a really great performance. And the part where she gets off the carriage, she's like, "I'm a lady." It's really quite sweet and
just
horrible.
My heart. She has
and then the one scene I really do like is the one with the woman eating grapes at the window, and she says it's Cleopatra's Needle, and he says 6 men died bringing it from Egypt, which I think is like a really interesting scene. It hints at a thing that's really important in the book that they never talk about.
What's that?
In the book, so he's a Mason, right? Now, I read the book a couple of years ago, so I'm aware that I might be getting this wrong. He's a Mason, right? And he's also obsessed with the impact he will have on the world and the effects of time and things like that. History and time. It's a big theme in the book. And there's a long issue of the novel, which I assume was one issue of like a comic, because that's how they're written, I think. But it's him and Netley, the carriage rider, riding around London, and he's giving like a fucking university level speech about these historical landmarks of London and talking about the mystical power that they have and how filled with meaning they are. And Cleopatra's Needle is one of them. And it's a really fascinating. It's when I read the book, I was like, first part of the book where I was like, oh, this might be like a work of like just total fucking genius. Like, it's so interesting, such a weird idea. I'm not sure if I quite understand it, but yeah. So it's a very, and also not just a work of genius, but a work of just like impeccable study by Alan Moore.
Yeah.
Like, the book is also there's tons of like footnotes and stuff like that. But it's also just like, man, I would never put this much effort into fucking writing a historical thing, but it's really cool. And so that scene hints at that, which, you know, yeah, he draws this kind of like conspiracy angle to like Masonic.
Yeah. And I've always been curious why more movies didn't touch on that.
Masonry.
Yeah. Freemasons. I can't think of, maybe
because Freemasons aren't cool and opium is.
Opium's chill, but yeah.
No, I find it really interesting too, but I think it's probably because the Illuminati control Hollywood and
grapes.
And all of the great production goes through the Illuminati.
I mean,
straight into
I can relate.
The hands of Dark Annie. Sorry, I wanted to point out one other thing. So I was talking about the other performances. There's a woman, there's an actress in this movie named Susan Lynch, who is really great. She plays the gay sex worker, the one who's hidden.
What a gem.
Hiding her gayness a little bit, but not really. She makes out with a couple of the ladies, and the one calls her a pig and stuff. It's a really good scene.
It's a really good scene. Yeah.
But so I remember watching. I was like, oh yeah, her. She's got such a recognizable face. And then I was like, I've seen her in like 100 things. And then I looked, and I was like, well, she's been in 100 things, but really, I've only ever seen her in this. She's a really good actress, Susan Lynch. She's a British actress. And she's been in a bunch of stuff, but I was like, oh, my entire thought about this woman is from this one movie. Yeah, but she's really good in it. Yeah.
Do you remember any of the other things
Nope.
that she was in? No, right?
Nope.
Nothing as big as From Hell.
Maybe, I don't remember.
Wow.
Good actress, though. Kind of a character actress. Does a lot of like British TV. I think was kind of her jam. But yeah,
I was sad when she dies. That was the only kind of character that had a bit of a sympathy for me.
She had a really grisly death too.
Yeah,
you see her like throat slashed like
correct.
Straight. It's very disgusting.
It was the cleanest in terms of not getting fully like disemboweled. All she had was her throat slit because of someone finding the ruckus in the street. But unfortunate. I wish she had gotten away with it.
I want to shout out another British character actor. Moment. The coroner is played by a man named Ian McNeice, an actor. He's in Ace Ventura. He's in one of the Ace Ventura films.
Yeah.
He's lovely. He's a very large, jolly man with nice jowls. He plays the most uncool coroner I've ever seen. Usually coroners are awesome.
They have a lot of chill.
Yeah. The greatest coroner, in my opinion, in film is in Seven. It's the guy who, in The Wire, he plays Carcetti's campaign manager, and he's great, a great actor. But in Seven, he plays the coroner in one scene, and he just fucking spikes the ball. He's great. And then, speaking of The Wire, the coroner in The Wire is an absolute gem. But this guy, he's the worst coroner because he can't handle, like, he looks at, like, it's like he throws up when he needs to see blood, which I will say, that's a plot point because Johnny Depp is like, I can't handle this coroner. He fucking sucks. I need to talk to a doctor who can handle this shit. And he's introduced to Jack the Ripper. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone who is very familiar with the human anatomy. And they do, and to that human anatomy dialogue that Bilbo Baggins goes on about later, where he rips out the heart of one of the women, and then goes in detail talking about the heart. And he says something, and I've got a little note here. It says, "The human heart is a dense and powerful muscle, much like the organic equivalent of mahogany, and notoriously difficult to burn." And just the way it turns into this, he basically turns into Smeagol in that moment.
A little, yeah. That's another point where they're trying to adapt a part of the novel, which is just kind of like, it's too much.
It's too much.
And so, like, I will say, like, as much as this movie I think fails to really do justice to a really great work, that, like, Alan Moore hates even the good adaptations of his work, which there's only really been one. And so, but even he was just like, please stop adapting my work.
Yeah.
And he's probably saying that now because FX had greenlit a show based on From Hell, like a miniseries based on From Hell. That's being written by the guy who wrote Children of Men, which is really exciting, David Arata.
Ooh.
So, I mean, Children of Men is a fucking pretty phenomenal movie.
Hell yeah.
But it's nice that it's getting another chance. And hopefully 9/11 won't happen again when it's released. Yeah, not this time. No. So I wanted to point, like, getting back to Johnny Depp and his performance. Like, he's already a massive star at this point. He's about to be the biggest star on earth in 2003, right? He does fucking why can't I think of the word? Pirates of the Caribbean.
That's right.
Right after this, which is a good movie. I've only seen it one time and I was 13, but it was a good movie as far as I know. And he's fine in it. But he's about to be like the biggest star on earth. And like, but Sleepy Hollow is a movie that I really love and I really like his performance in, but it might be the only movie I like Johnny Depp in. And in this movie, he's like the worst version of himself. And the character is like, there's literally, I mean, first of all, he's like the stereotypical like cop with a dead wife, fucking,
yeah,
who we never even get into it.
No.
This is basically like, you see her once and then later he's like, I had a wife once, she's dead anyway. Like,
let me go kiss this other
sucks,
lady.
Man.
Yeah.
Heather Graham's like, what's wrong with you? And he's like, well, having a dead wife really sucks.
Real bummer. Yeah. Ladies be dropping dead around this town. So what's a man got to do?
Everywhere I go, ladies are just dying on
me.
Yeah. And then there is also a scene like, which doesn't have a lot of substance, which is like the equivalent of the modern like, put your badge and your gun on my desk. You're off the case.
Yeah.
You're a hothead.
Inspector Depp.
And then he comes back. He's like they kidnap Johnny Depp. This is all the reason I didn't go over this in the plot is like it's all almost inconsequential. He's discovered the conspiracy, quote unquote, that is happening. And then they like knock him out. They're in a carriage. He kills the two guys who have kidnapped him, and he runs back to try and to stop the last killing, which is he thinks is of Heather Graham, Mary Jane Kelly, but it turns out to be this poor fucking what's the word for it? Just total plot device of a woman who shows up and is like, I brought you bread. I'm gonna sleep in your bed and be mutilated. And he like rushes back. And then the same guy who is like, you're a hothead, you're off the case, badge and desk on my gun and badge on my desk, is like, oh, it's okay. He's done now. You're promoted. Yeah. And it's like, first off, the weird thing about that scene is like, they're in front of like 20 other cops, and he's just like, don't worry, my buddy is done killing these women, and the cops are just kind of like, I wonder what he's talking about over there. Like, he's saying it right out loud.
But that's the whole point, right? That the corruption is so deep that it's all the way to the top, and who's going to do anything about it to stop them? Yeah,
and the corruption aspect of the thematic corruption in this film, they don't really hit it because they're also hiding the killer from you. If you know that William Gull has been told by Queen Victoria to murder these women, then you can start to like it becomes a bit of more of a cat and mouse rather than a murder mystery, right?
Yeah.
But then you can start to be like, oh man, so he's a Mason, and in the he's part of like the royal apparatus,
Right.
and then it's like, oh, and the cops are involved. Oh, and da da da. And that's kind of what happens in the novel. Is like Aberline finds out about the conspiracy and resigns, essentially. But because he's not the protagonist, he doesn't have to fucking kill people in a wagon like Johnny Depp does.
Have a crazy
or smoke
too
opium.
fast to furious caravan.
And the point, the other thing about like Johnny Depp's clairvoyance and his like skills as a detective is like, it's weird that everyone, they're like, you see them in your dreams, like you see visions of this, and everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I hope you solve some crimes, and he never does.
No. He's like, I'll think about it.
It does not help him whatsoever to solve any of these crimes.
No. And you brought up a point where why don't they show us who the killer is, like in the comic book pretty early on, and in the movie they don't do it until the end. There is no one killer anyway, right? Of course the instrument is Bilbo Baggins. Sir Ian Holm is the ultimate Jack the Ripper, but if it is all of the Freemasons participating in this to some degree, is that insinuated, or am I just thinking that, oh yeah, there's a bunch of other guys who are also involved in this?
The higher up Freemasons seem to know what's going on.
And they find a scapegoat, which is this guy.
So there's a scene where the James Gordon of Batman fame, the police commissioner, and then the guy who's like the attendant to the Queen, and the another dude, Kidney, which is a great name. They're all in Freemasons watching the other surgeon get brought into the Freemasons. And they're like, oh, opium-addled Johnny Depp has found out about our conspiracy, despite being addicted and a fucking not a very good detective. And they're like, oh, do you think Gull is like confessing what's like telling him stuff that he shouldn't be telling him? But they hint at that like maybe Gull knows who it is. But then when Johnny Depp confronts him, it's just not a very...
It's a bit loosey-goosey in terms of clarifying that.
Yeah.
They just kind of leave it to the user to understand that, well, one or more are involved at one given time. And that's that.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of like, for a mystery film, there's not a lot of like red herrings to divert your attention away from Ian Holm. And so you're just kind of like waiting for the truth to be revealed. But I think they didn't want to I think the filmmakers and producers didn't want to spoil Jack the Ripper, even though it was over 100 years old at that point. They were like, some people haven't seen it. Some people don't know.
2 decades go by. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Like it's at this point, it's kind of like, we all know about Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Okay. Of course, nobody really knows who Jack the Ripper was, but yeah. The other thing too I found really interesting, and I'm gonna have to paraphrase this. I didn't write this quote down. Was Alan Moore said that like he read a theory from a Ripperologist, as I believe they're called. They went with Ripperologists instead of Jackologists because that was too.
Ripper, I hardly knew her.
Because that was too embarrassing at parties to be like, I'm a Jackologist. You're like, which Jack? And it's like, the best one. So a Ripper, I don't even know if that's true. A Ripperologist. But like a dude who wrote a book about a theory about William Gull, the real William Gull.
Nice,
and Alan Moore was inspired by that, but was very clear, being like, I was inspired to write a fictional account of this thing because it's really interesting. And he was like, I don't believe that it's true, but it's like the fun thing about fiction is it's like telling you that it's a lie immediately rather than having to debate whether it's the truth or not. And so he like built this story out of this theory, which I thought was really cool, which I'm not a Jackologist, so I don't really know how convincing it is or not. I don't even know what the general Jackology consensus is about who it was.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about Jack the Ripper, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, overall, I'm not surprised at the ratings for this movie. Although, from nostalgic point of view, I would rate it higher than what it is on Rotten Tomatoes right now. It's at 57% or something.
Yeah. It's a watchable film.
It's a watchable film.
With mistakes.
I would give it at least 10 more percent points. So
that's fucking crazy.
I would
I
keep
don't think
it
it's that
nestled at 67, 69 even if we're filthy. But yeah, I'll allow it. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll allow this movie to exist.
I decree the order of pre. This movie is 69%.
It's interesting because, like, out of being now 21 years since this movie came out, fucking hell, that's crazy. It has no real contextual meaning to me. You know, like we talked about Jarhead, go back and listen if you want. And it was kind of like, yeah, you know, it's a movie about the Gulf War. At the same time, there was a war in the Middle East happening that people are like, hey, the Dixie Chicks are like, hey, that's not cool. This movie, I'm like, I honestly thought about when I first rewatched it. I hadn't seen it for years. I honestly thought, I was like, someone was like, hey, Sleepy Hollow was good, right? Get that guy. Yeah. Do another one like that. It's like, oh, what should it be about? Find a book. It's like, you know what I mean? Like it seemed a little, I don't know. Oh, and okay. I said earlier, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Hughes brothers. Not specifically, but I want to talk about the movie as like, so I always think about how difficult it must be to make a film in general, no matter what movie you're making, and still not making a very good movie, and how much that must be difficult, but also you can be proud of the hard work you did and stuff. Yeah. And like I read a there was like an interesting, I mean, thank God for the Guardian having like all of their old film shit is like all updated to like the actual website. You don't have to go into like an internet archive to find film stuff. And there was this like very short piece about this movie being filmed, and it did sound like, I was like, they put in a lot of detailed work into this that just kind of washes away on screen. And it's a real shame, because it's like, I think they had the right idea. They really did. Yeah. I think even today with the FX miniseries that's eventually going to come out at some point, I don't think that, like, I still think there still has to be a main protagonist around which to circle the plot. In my opinion, it would make sense that Mary Jane Kelly is that person, especially today, or just even the group of sex workers. Aberline, the detective himself, would be just not. Like, he would be a tertiary character. I'm not sure he would even show up in every episode, but it would be more like Aberline is stuck between the forces of these like 5 sex workers and Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper's after these women, and they're trying to not be killed by him and other men who are trying to victimize them. And Aberline is kind of like in the middle, which makes him a very kind of like inactive protagonist. And that's what works against Johnny Depp's character in this. Yeah.
His whole value is kind of diluted in the process.
100%.
As a detective, as a clairvoyant, he kind of sucks on both degrees. He's never there on time, and there's no kind of big skill other than him touching the lip of one of the dead women. Oh, right. That is the only plot point in which his opium abuse is like brought back necessary again. Is because he was like, I smell laudanum on her lips, and Bilbo is like, oh, yeah, only an addict would smell that. You're chasing the dragon there, mate. Yeah. I think this episode is a good excuse to bust out our really, really good English accents. Yeah. Yeah. I've been crushing it for years. Yeah. Oi. Yeah, there you go. You sound just like Heather Graham, an English person. Yeah. An English lady. Me and Heather, two peas in a pod. Yeah. I want to rate some things in the movie that are very memorable for me. Grapes, 10 out of 10. Solid representation. Can I ask follow-up questions? Of course. Do you have time for follow-up questions, ma'am? I will take one. Is this the best
is this the best grapes have been on film?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Because I have a candidate, if I'm remembering correctly, but I'm not sure. The scene in Clockwork Orange where the guy's feeding Alex grapes, and he's like opening his mouth and like, and then chews really disgustingly. I think that's a grape that he's eating.
Damn, I had that whole movie is PTSD, so I've
Clockwork
blocked
Orange?
it out from my mind.
Well, I thought it was like a really
Just a fun afternoon watch.
charming family film.
Tuesday night.
Yeah. I think most people like it's kind of like crowd pleasing when he kills the woman with the gigantic ceramic dick. Go on. You're gonna rate?
Yeah.
So 10 out of 10 for the grapes?
Grapes, 10 out of 10.
And so would you say it's probably the best use of grapes in film history?
It's the best. You know what? Yeah, it is the best use of grapes in film history.
Big words.
One, because sometimes it's just the stems. All parts are used, in a less crass way than you would imagine. No one's feeding it to anyone. Well, okay, the one time.
I have a sleeper. Can I ask a follow-up question to this? I have a sleeper, a more abstract use of grapes in film. Sideways.
Yeah. Wine's old news though.
Okay, so you're going to rate some other things. Go on.
Good choice of casting Hagrid as the sweet, gentle inspector guy who's
Fantastic.
also just very wise in all things.
Good
Hamlet.
cop. Good, as Bunk Moreland would say, good police.
Good police.
Yeah.
Correct.
Or
Freemasons, sex circle.
good police, as he would say.
Good police.
Good police. Yeah.
There you go.
Freemason sex circles.
10 out of 10 Freemason content.
Is it like I'm a really big fan of. Well, I'm a big fan of secret societies. I think they're really interesting.
Yeah.
And I wish this movie had more of it. The novel had enough to really like whet my appetite for like Masons. That's neat. But really, like, the movie doesn't quite get there the way that Eyes Wide Shut kind of does.
Oh,
and also,
no.
you know what? Another underrated secret society film pick.
Suspiria.
And no, I wasn't going to say that.
Ooh.
I was going to say The Good Shepherd. Lots of
I've
skull and bones content.
I've not seen it. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's on our list. That might be an episode at some point.
Perfect.
But you have to actually see it first.
Nice.
It was directed by one of history's great cinema opium smokers, Robert De Niro.
Oh, hey. Number one opium,
He
baby.
was smoking opium on set the entire time.
And all that content. Okay, so opium content alone, 10 out of 10 for our boy Clive Owen and Nick.
Yeah, I mean TV, but cinematic,
yeah.
Cinematic opium smoking. Clive Owen in the Nick.
Mm-hmm.
But Clive Owen also in the Nick, he really exudes an air of competence. Even whereas
Correct.
like Johnny Depp, he's like, oh God, this cop's an opium addict. But then he comes out and he's like, I can see the murders in my dreams. And you're like, oh, that'll help. No.
No.
Again, I said it. This is the third time I said it. No, doesn't matter. So you're just kind of like, oh, you're just a fucking shitty opium addict. Like, get it together.
They would be in the news 2 hours later.
Which is, to be honest, probably why Johnny Depp was like drawn to the parks. He was like, I mean, I've smoked opium in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll do it again.
He did Blow before this. I've never seen Blow, but it's about cocaine, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Coffin Flop, 10 out of 10.
I mean, for predating actual Coffin Flop, maybe do you think Tim Robinson was inspired by this movie?
I hope so, because he's the only reason why I found that scene so memorable.
Yeah.
And it completely changed the tone of From Hell for me from that scene onwards. I just couldn't.
I think that sometimes great artists, they like build upon things that they're inspired by. And so which now we've pretty much established that Tim Robinson was inspired by From Hell to create Coffin Flop.
Oh yeah.
But he kind of builds on it, because I think that like one of the great things about Coffin Flop, which isn't really in this movie, is like in Coffin Flop, the bodies really fucking explode out of the casket. Whereas in this, it's kind of just a little
Just a
like,
face.
boom. Oh,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
yeah. such a dark film needs some comic relief.
There you go.
And it's so funny when her body just falls out of the casket. It's hilarious. It had me in stitches. Yeah.
They're gonna know we're pretty deprived. I think this movie should leave. They should, maybe they shouldn't
The
do
public consciousness.
more TV shows.
I don't want to like shit on a movie, really. It just doesn't. It could have been, That's the real tragedy. It's not a woman falling out of a casket. It's not the deaths of 5 sex workers
No.
in the Whitechapel district in 1888. It's that they could have made a good movie based on all of this death, So I want to go back to Johnny Depp's suicide. I have a really important question.
Oh God.
Do you think when Hagrid, as one of the pallbearers of Johnny Depp in this film, do you think Johnny Depp fell out of his casket?
Do you think Hagrid had to Wingardium Leviosa?
Do you think
Johnny
he coffin flopped?
Oh, Ripper. I hardly know her. Oh, sorry. Top 2 things from hell that you are happy exist.
No, Ian Holm. I really do like. I think Ian Holm, good performance, not served by the stylistic choices around his performance. And my girl Susan Lynch.
That's yeah.
The Lynchster, as we call her in the biz.
The Lynchster.
I don't know.
Good second pick. I'm glad you brought it up.
She's got a distinctive look.
Yeah.
I really am like, I mean, she's beautiful for one, but also just like she has just like a look that like, or as soon as I watched this movie, I was like, oh yeah, her.
Yeah.
But really, I've only seen her in this.
I don't know why I keep thinking of her as being in something with Olivia Colman or
maybe. Is there anything else to say about this movie?
I think
this went by fast.
Yeah.
We've talked for over an hour.
Yeah. And we stayed pretty much on topic and everything.
It felt like I'm like, did we like rush through that? Just being like, From Hell, it's an okay film. Anyway, Johnny Depp sucks. Let's go.
I think those are the main crucial points. So
we really hit the plot points.
I'm glad 14 times it came up that, hey, he fucking sucks at his job, bro. Yeah.
Should we wrap this up like
Let's
so
do
many caskets in London mortuaries?
Coffin flop.
Coffin flop. Thanks for listening.